Salvage, a story by user Rantarian. Chapter 32. Game Plan. 512 Corridor, Erbzerk Orbital Factory Main Station. Almost as soon as Rypov had informed the police of the situation, the entire 512 corridor had been shut down and surrounded. At Jen's suggestion, they had also started to use hover cameras to roam the area looking for the human. They weren't finding anything. It had been a costly exercise as well, and Rypov had been forced to listen to a whole litany of complaints from the senior authorities. Not that there was any gratitude for having the crew of the Zottersil provide assistance either. There were even hints of resentment and suspicion, as though they, and Jen particularly, had somehow been responsible for the whole grisly affair. Rypov may be no diplomat, but as cathartic as shooting those people might be, and as effectively as it might shut them up, he was still completely certain that it would also prove to be the kind of significant life decision that resulted in getting put in jail and staying there. The area itself was not huge, merely a number of tightly packed facilities with multiple levels that would turn a manhunt into a nightmare. It was the most ideal place the killer, English as Jen called him, could have picked. Rypov was no stranger to bad places to get caught in a crossfire or ambush, and these buildings were basically it. "This doesn't feel at all right," Jen said as they finished their third sweep of the area. Her nerves were a wreck. Even the usually oblivious Rypov could see that, worn ragged by spending each moment in the expectation of sudden violence. Rypov didn't feel too much better, with his attention having been divided across all the possible points of attack in each and every room they moved through. At every moment they had been waiting for an ambush to hit them, or waiting for it to hit another group somewhere else. It was hard to remember a more stressful situation.
"Perhaps he was deterred by all these police,"
he suggested, although he personally doubted it would be the case.
"Or perhaps he is toying with us."
"Rypov,"
Jen said,
"I can tell you that whoever he is a most seriously disturbed individual, and my entire knowledge of such people comes from the telly. I don't know that we can predict him like that."
"You also said that Adrian was seriously disturbed,"
he reminded her.
"It was not impossible to predict him, merely difficult. What would he have done?"
That seemed to trouble her, because she frowned and grew quiet, and at first Rypov thought he may have offended her by mentioning the taboo topic, regardless of how relevant it might have been.
"He wouldn't have written all over the walls in blood, for one,"
she said, her voice hard with a mixture of anger and something else Rypov couldn't immediately recognize.
"And I can't imagine him carving someone up like that poor foreman."
She grew quiet, her eyes growing wide in what Rypov had learned to interpret as sudden realization.
"He's creating a disturbance,"
she said.
"There was no way it wasn't going to make one. This isn't something you see every day. It's a distraction," she said. "It has to be. He wanted us here while
he was busy attacking us from elsewhere,"
Rypov finished.
"But we are all here."
Jen stared at him.
"We might be,"
she said.
"But our ship isn't."
The mice ran around and around in the 512 corridor while Cameron watched through the handful of hover cameras he had roaming the space above corridor 512. They moved fearfully, with excessive caution, waiting for the trap to spring at any given moment. Then they were wandering around in a dreadful confusion when no trap had sprung, never realizing the whole point of the exercise, never discovering that they were being watched and studied and tested like laboratory animals. That was how the game was played. But they had been so disappointing, their efforts verging on childish. Where was the competence that had allowed them to repel a hunter army? The tactics he saw here were those of prey. It made the whole process of formulating a plan seem entirely unnecessary, he thought unhappily. People like these could never comprehend and appreciate being destroyed by a really good plan. A really good plan would be wasted on them. But that didn't mean there was no fun to be had. Cameron White was a big boy, and he knew that as far as fun went, sometimes you had to make your own. As the mice played at hunters, Cameron White paid a little visit to their ship, a freighter vessel that didn't exactly suggest wanted pirate. This was what they used to transport their ill-gotten gains to Mr. Cripple. And even with Mr. Cripple out of the picture, there'd just be someone new to take his place if there wasn't already. He didn't bother to try and go inside. That sort of thing would get a man noticed, even if he was in costume. And Cameron White did not enjoy being noticed. Even mice could be able to put two and two together if he went leaving them the answers. Neither did he attach anything to the outside of the vessel either. He'd long ago learned that things poorly attached to the outside of a vessel had a nasty habit of falling off during FTL. Although the things that experience would do to a Xeno were truly a wonder to behold, and were easily found with anything but the most cursory of searches. In any case, that would again require getting a lot closer to the freighter than he found comfortable, and unless he intended on clearing the entire dock of its workers, a very challenging, albeit equally rewarding task, he would be noticed. Instead, he approached the cargo that was awaiting the return of the mice for loading, a tracking device and a unit of space lettuces. and he'd be able to give a merry chase, and they'd even do him the favor of putting it on their own ship. A well-worn cliché, perhaps, but the classics always had their place, and they served to spice up an otherwise bland game. Would they find it right away? During transit, perhaps? Maybe not until it was being unloaded on the other side. Maybe not at all. Maybe he'd be able to take it back when he arrived at their base of operations. And when he did arrive, well, then the game would begin in earnest. Kavaris, Kortai Directorate Core World. Further instructions had taken Adrian all of 5 minutes, a Kortai systems tech responsible for breaking into the devices that Adrian would eventually get him to, and a Chinasho pilot who would be tasked with transport and gunnery when paired with what he would have described as a light gunship. Margarita had revealed that Askit, the Kortai tech, had until very recently been serving a long prison sentence received for breaking into the systems belonging to Dominion Intelligence, and adding some interesting charges against someone with whom he had held a grudge. He'd only been caught on an unrelated crime after his victim had spent 10 months in a Death World secret prison. Adrian had only been slightly surprised that such places actually existed. That it was a Kortai initiative did not surprise him at all. The Chinasho pilot, however, had a distinguished record flying in the war, and could name half a dozen places she'd helped cross off the map. Gudugan, as she was called, was here for money. But not only that, it was also about revenge. They were the second team employed by Herbiter for this, and the first had contained her husband. He had vanished along with the rest of his team, and she wouldn't settle for a nice funeral. He didn't bother to insult her intelligence by asking why she thought she could find answers here. What they were about to get involved with was so big that it had to be related. So he asked her something else instead.
Do you have any idea where we should start looking? It seems to me that your husband might have uncovered enough to get noticed by the wrong kind of people, if he told you anything.
She seemed surprised at his immediate willingness to cooperate in her personal vendetta.
Nobody else seemed to care about that, so long as I do my job.
I just think that it's the fastest way to find these assholes, he replied. The faster we finish the job, the sooner you get your revenge, and the sooner I stop looking like Mr. Bump.
Who is Mr. Bump? Askett asked curiously. Some kind of earth animal? Adrian stared at him for a while.
Mate,
he said at last,
I'm not going to spend my valuable fucking time teaching you about Mr. Men.
Well, then what are you going to spend your valuable fucking time doing? Askett replied in a surprisingly solid imitation.
He's going to spend it planning,
Gudugan replied for him.
Planning to find the human who killed my husband, and planning to burn down everything he and his masters built.
Well then,
Adrian said.
You heard the lady? Looks like I'm planning on fucking a lot of shit up.
He looked between them.
Now,
he said,
let's start by you telling me everything you know.
Erbzerk Orbital Factory, main station. Jennifer Delady, mid-20s, space babe pirate queen, and completely worried about when the next shoe would drop. The fact that the ship was fine had not assuaged her fears. She had made Cheer and Tricror go over the whole thing twice, inside and out, before she had let the dock workers even touch it. She had talked to them, too, to see if any human aside from herself had been seen anywhere around it. The answer had been no, but it had also been no when she had started asking around. Nobody had seen a human around besides Jen herself, and in the current state of the galaxy, that was simply not something that was easily missed. That in itself had told Jen enough. She was either looking for an alien with a deeply twisted sense of humor, or the more likely scenario of a human in disguise. Unfortunately, either case meant that any further investigation was entirely pointless. Magnificent. We're done loading, Cheer said, joining her on the command deck. No luck? She sighed and leaned back in the plush chair she'd commandeered for thinking in. Nothing that helps find him, she said tiredly. It's been doing my head in. I can't help feeling that I've missed something, but I've no idea what, or what I should have done differently. I tell you, I'm going half mad. Perhaps I shouldn't tell you the bad news I just heard, then? The other shoe? She asked and laughed loudly, but with little real amusement at his confusion. She was sure that this sort of business could send her mad, and wondered how Adrian had coped. Maybe he hadn't. Just tell me the new bad news, she told him, already considering 1,001 possibilities as to what had gone wrong now. Otherwise, I'll go mad the rest of the way pondering what it is. The police have discovered a family of Viscatics stabbed and dismembered in their own home, Cheer said uncomfortably. 2 adults and a female child. Jen swallowed hard. The same guy? It has to be, right? They're treating them as linked, Cheer said, but they haven't got the experience to deal with this sort of thing. I don't know that they'll be able to stop this guy if we just leave. You're saying you want to stay and help find him? She asked. She wasn't really against the idea in concept, but in practice it seemed like English had already started targeting her and her crew. And it wasn't like she was familiar with dealing with total psychos, no matter what she might have called Adrian while she was pissed off.
I'm really not sure how much help we can be, Cheer.
Even if we can't give much, he said, if we simply leave and he continues to murder, I do not think my conscience, such as it is, could handle that.
What do the others think?
Jen asked, although she did have a suspicion that with the possible exception of Zrypov, the sentiment would be across the board. I haven't asked them, Cheer replied. This is what I am telling you. I won't stop you from going, Jen. But if you do go, I won't be coming with you.
You think you'll be able to stop him?
Jen asked incredulously.
The man is a total fucking nutcase. I wouldn't even be surprised if he didn't even really see you all as people. And that's how he can go into a family home and kill everyone inside.
Humans are not unstoppable, Jen. Merely very dangerous, Cheer said.
Cheer,
Jen replied firmly.
You're not equipped.
Electrical potential and current, Cheer interrupted nonsensically, although with a certainty that would be strange if it didn't mean anything. It is possible with what we have here on the station.
What are you talking about?
Jen asked, genuinely not following. There was a very scientific-sounding thing to say so forcefully, and Jen had never been the best student when it came to the non-computing sciences. Adrian told Tricror and I, Cheer said, a while after we came back. High potential, low current to stun. Increase current to kill. It clicked.
You're talking about stun guns, she said in complete surprise. That could definitely work, but why did Adrian tell you about those?
I asked him the same question, Cheer said. He was not specific, but from what I have gathered, I doubt it was because he feared you. I do not know how to treat him after that. I did not know how to treat him after that. How do you talk to a man who has handed you the key to his death and won't even tell you why?
You're only telling me this now,
Jen asked. It was a lot to take in, and now she wondered what Adrian had been thinking to do that. She was a little jealous that he had trusted them enough to give them that kind of information, and yet had withheld so much from her. We saw no reason to concern you with the extent of our knowledge, Cheer admitted, especially in light of his fate. I apologize if this was an error. She paused, looking away and thinking.
No,
she said finally.
It wasn't an error. It wouldn't have helped the situation then, but it might now.
Jen looked up to face him.
I'll tell you what you need to know to hunt a man, but right now I need to go find out what this radiation burst was. Zrypov says he got the information from some other guys, so...
You can't wait? Cheer asked. This is important, Jen. More people could die.
Zrypov says it will only take a day or two, no more, she said. Then we'll swing back past here and help.
But it was more likely, she thought, that the problem would follow her instead. She had that being stalked by a serial killer feeling that normally comes with being identified in a bad limerick written in blood. Nobody put that sort of effort into a relationship unless they were expecting something in return, and in this case Jen didn't think a polite no thanks would do the trick. You're afraid, Cheer accused. Adrian would not have been afraid. He
is dead,
Jen began, her temper breaking for a moment.
Adrian is almost certainly dead, Cheer. And yes, I'm scared, because on Earth, our horror stories are in the newspapers, and they're about blokes like him finding girls like me and cutting them up into little bits if they're lucky. So you'll appreciate why I might be a little worried about getting that lovely message.
Cheer was silent, seeming a little taken aback by her outburst. Then he looked away shamefully. I apologize, Jen. It is easy to forget that while humans are all very dangerous to us, they must also have those they fear. I did not appreciate your fears, and I should have. Jen studied him for a moment and then smiled.
Never mind that now, Cheer, she said softly. This is what we'll do. You'll take Tricror and help the police here get the weapons they'll need. Zrypov and I will go out past this space thing and be back within a couple of days. By then, the weapons will be ready, and maybe in the meantime I can remember enough messed up facts to be of help.
That seemed to be something he could accept at least, and he nodded his agreement. I will say one last thing, he said before leaving. You are not weak, Jen. You should not fear this man.
Thank you, Cheer,
she said, but she knew he was wrong. Kavaris, Kortai Directorate Core World. What I'm gathering here, Adrian said unhappily, is that on the whole we know precisely jack fucking shit about what is going on out here. That's not true, Askett protested. Entirely. What you've told me is that there are some bad guys who run companies and they pay off your politicians to keep a war going. he summarized, and then held up his hand before Gadugan could add her own 2 cents.
And that maybe they have a fucking human helping them. Maybe.
It's a solid start, Gadugan said.
It's fucking useless is what it is,
Adrian replied irritably. 2 hours of fruitless conversation with the pair of them had actually made him less aware of what was going on.
What we need here are some solid facts.
I suppose I could start hacking around, Askett said uncertainly.
You get caught doing that, Adrian said coolly, and I'll fucking guarantee there'll be thugs at your door. My approach is somewhat more direct.
It involves violence, doesn't it? Askett interpreted glumly.
I'm fine with that,
Gadugan added.
It will involve a little bit of violence, Adrian admitted. Possibly some kidnapping. There may be some torture. Still fine, Gadugan replied.
Askett sighed. Why do I feel like I'm not really with the good guys here?
There are no good guys, Adrian told him. Or at least that's what I once learned from a man whose day I brought to a real fucking sudden end. Still, seems like the sort of advice that Kortai would take to heart.
That is racial stereotyping, Askett replied crossly. I'll have you know I'm an individual, not just some Kortai. Why don't you turn those brain cells towards explaining what it is you have in mind?
All right then,
Adrian replied, smiling slightly as he peered over the map of the megacity. He pointed to a facility on the outskirts.
This is how we're going to play it. This place here is the corporate headquarters for this, what the fuck are they called?
Iridis Industries, Askett supplied helpfully. They do medicines, home goods, children's toys,
and weapons,
Adrian finished.
Just the sort of fuckers you'd expect to be raking it in from a war, right?
Askett looked at his datapad, flicking through some details and frowning. Their profits have drastically increased since the beginning of the war, he observed. It's also likely that they sell to both sides, and there's nothing preventing them from doing so.
So they're probably not fans of peace, Adrian replied. Like they say, you just have to follow the money.
I have never heard that phrase before, Askett said, but it works. What do you intend to do? Adrian thought a moment.
I need you to look into who owns stock.
Stock? Askett asked.
Shares. Slices of a company divided up amongst investors,
Adrian said, trying to think how to describe it. He didn't have what you might call a mind for finance. What a bizarre concept, Askett said. Corporations are owned in part by their employees. The more senior the employee, the more money they make. Profits are distributed based on that.
Some sort of bastardized profit share system then,
Adrian reckoned.
That still means the guys at the top are the ones getting paid the most, and who have the most money to lose if the war ends. Who have they been giving money to?
Why would anyone know that?
Gadugan asked.
Because mixing money and politics is a fucking piss-poor idea?
Adrian asked, now at the edges of exasperation.
These are the fucking basics of a fucking democracy, he berated them. How the fuck are you lot not run by some tin-pot tyrant?
They at least had the decency to look embarrassed on behalf of their societies. Adrian supposed that, just as none of that had ever occurred to them, it hadn't occurred to their societies either. If that didn't change, they were going to be completely fucked when humanity inevitably hit the scene.
Really? I feel sorry for you poor bastards when Earth gets its shit together and finally decides to join us, he said. You lot are going to get eaten alive. Metaphorically.
He added that last bit hurriedly as their eyes had widened in horror. Space didn't need more than one race of hunters, although really even one was too many.
Look, all you've told me actually makes it easier. We go to where the rich people are, and then we ask them questions they don't want to answer.
And then comes the torture?
Gadugan asked, with perhaps a smidgen too much enthusiasm.
Well, he said with a slight shrug, maybe a little torture.
Adrian wondered what Herbiter would think of this plan. He was fairly certain the Kortai leader wouldn't like it very much, but if he'd wanted a job done slow and careful, he'd done 2 things wrong. First, he'd hired Adrian Saunders, and second, he'd turned Adrian Saunders into a giant blue teddy bear. This 2-bit investigation was about to get expedited. All right, guys, that's going to be it for today. I hope the sound is all right. I moved into the new place. My room was a bit echoey, so right now I am in a closet covered by a big, fluffy, thick blanket. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one today. Adrian is in fine form. Jen is losing her shit and might get killed. Fingers crossed, everybody, because Cameron White is a nutcase. So thank you guys again so much for listening, taking the time out of your busy day to be here and enjoy it with me. I'm going to start experimenting probably hopefully next week when I get back from my mom's with some of the formats on the channel. As always, guys, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if I did anything wrong. Let me know if there's something you liked. If you want to continue the growth of this channel, please go ahead and click on the link in the description to go to my Patreon. Big shout out to my patrons, Russ of the North, Lorry, Yroll, Artur, Misleading Guide, and Sarda Karr. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.
Oh, it was hot in there. Oh, it was so hot.